So here's a little New Year thought, if not sermon, which comes about because I listened to Archewell, the new podcast from Harry and Meghan, partly because people seem to be being quite sniffy about it, and I was intrigued, and I thought it was actually good. It is well meant, without cynicism, has contributions from lots of people who really have worked at the front line of life and trying to put together true wisdom. But it did leave me with one big question, which is what I hope for from 2021. Because the main thrust of their contributors was that the new year would bring healing, it would bring recovery, relief, return to normal life. And whilst I completely get that, and in one way completely share it as well, there's another side of me that hopes we don't just return to normal after such a extraordinary, often painful, tricky year as 2020. Because the wisdom traditions tell me that it's often through suffering that real realizations come. Now, you must be careful what you wish for, and this is not to say that suffering is good. It is to recognise that suffering happens, and the distinctive feature of 2020 has been that that has been unavoidable for many, many, many of us. So the question then arises is what might suffering bring if we don't just completely seek to return to normal life, almost as if it didn't happen, but try to reflect upon what has happened. And the great spiritual leaders realize that suffering can break open into deeper dimensions of life, ones which were not considered possible before life was so powerfully disrupted. And I think you get a sense of that and what that might be about from another word which was really big in 2020, which was the word empathy. It came up because of the care that COVID prompts as much as the panic and concern. And empathy is quite a new word. It was actually only coined in 1904, but I think it's a new word for a very old perception that when two people meet, they don't just approach each other as animated bodies, as noises carried on the airwaves as they speak. They meet each other as living souls. There is this sense that one consciousness meets another consciousness, and the empathy arises because there's a part of us which recognizes, very unconsciously perhaps, but nonetheless, recognizes that our consciousness is shared, that in the meeting there is a unity, not just two monads trying not simply to collide. When I say I am Mark and you say I am who you are, there's a part of us which might perceive that that I-ness is shared. It rests on a being that holds us all. Now, this is part of why life is so valuable. It's part of why suffering is so terrible. But as well as trying to mitigate suffering, particularly in those who can't possibly hope to understand it, seeking to understand it can yield insights into this depth of life and why it's so valuable. It's why the founders of the great wisdom traditions found their new insights through experiences of suffering. There's Socrates who embraced doubt and uncertainty. There's Jesus who went into the wilderness. There's the Buddha who realized that people live and die. I'm sure that Harry and Meghan know much about this because their lives differently have been far from easy. And I hope that 2021 doesn't just bring a straightforward return to normal, doesn't just bring healing, but in a way brings more than that, brings a desire to know more of life's soulfulness, to reconnect with it at levels that material success, great as they are, and they really are, the vaccine is not to be sniffed at, but that material success can occlude in order that it could be a moment too when we recover something of the spiritual dimensions of life and are able to see and become more aligned to them, perhaps because of reflecting on the meaning of the suffering.